Hello, Eagles fans, and happy Monday here from the NovaCare Complex, and welcome inside the film room on PhiladelphiaEagles.com. I'm Fran Duffy, joined by NFL Film senior producer Greg Cosell. And Greg, today we're going to take a look at the edge rush position. These players that are coming off the corner, attacking offensive tackles as pass rushers. What one trait when you're watching these college players, and there's a lot of different things that go into it.
There's always more than one, Fran.
Yeah, when you're talking about getting after the quarterback, what number one trait are you looking for from these college prospects?
Well, to me, if you're just looking for athletic traits, and that we can get into much more, you have to have the ability to bend and be flexible. You've got to be able to turn the corner and get low and then be able to direct your path to close to the quarterback. There's a lot of guys that can burst upfield, but they can't bend. So they end up just going past the quarterback. Now, that's a critical trait. I think one of the things I look for as well is the use of their hands. You have to be able to use your hands, because if you just rush upfield, no matter how quick you are off the ball, sometimes you can just be pushed. You have to be able to use your hands, and that allows you then to counter. And that's another part of it. You can't just have one move. You can't just rush upfield. You have to be able to use your hands to counter back inside.
And I think that's what's most impressive about Ohio State's Joey Bosa. The physical gifts are good, but his ability to use his hands and really counter once initially blocked really are what sets him apart from these other edge rushers.
Yeah, because you wouldn't call him a true bender. I mean, I think he's probably going to get better at that. He's a player, the more I watch, the more I like, and I think he can be a quality pass rusher, but he does use his hands well. He's got strong hands too, and I think that that's absolutely critical. That's one thing you really look at when you watch pass rushers. Now, there's a lot of coaches who believe you can teach that as well, but if a guy has it coming out, you have a much better starting point.
And it's interesting too, the physical aspect of that, of actually using your hands, but also the mental approach of knowing how to use his hands and the timing and how to attack offensive tackles once you're initially blocked. Really, really intriguing to watch with Joey Bosa. But when you talk about that bend, that burst, and ability to turn the corner, run the hoop, as coaches like to say, Leonard Floyd from Georgia is really, really special at being able to turn the corner and accelerate when closing in on the quarterback.
Yeah, he's built like a basketball player. He moves like a basketball player, but he's a pass rusher. Although he was used in a very versatile way at Georgia because he was also a pass defender. He played in space pretty well. But he is really kind of a quick, twitchy guy. The key with him is he has to win by creating space for himself because of his body type. He can't get into a physical battle because he just doesn't have the body type to be able to engage in physical battles with offensive linemen.
One player I think is flying under the radar a little bit in terms of being a top 15, top 20 player ultimately in this draft class is Clemson's Kevin Dodd, a player that's got great size, really thrived down the stretch, was unblockable in that national title game against Alabama. What are your feelings on Dodd and what he can do in the league?
Yeah, there's a bunch of guys in this draft. Dodd's probably the best example that sort of, to me, start to fit the category of the player we now see in the NFL, the Michael Bennett's. The Malik Jackson, who just signed with Jacksonville. Guys who can play D-end in a 4-3 and then move to D-tackle in the sub-package and be effective as an inside pass rusher. Bennett's probably the best example of that in Seattle. I think Kevin Dodd has those qualities. I think you can line him up as a D-end in a 4-3 and move him inside in your sub-package, and he can become a very effective pass rusher.
When you talk about size and length and the ability to slide between multiple positions, but then you can win with that length on the perimeter. And one player that comes to mind, Shilique Calhoun, built a little bit differently than Kevin Dodd. He's not as big and not as bulky, but he's got that length. What do you think about Calhoun and what he brings to the NFL?
Yeah, Calhoun is interesting because of his body type. Again, another guy that looks like a basketball player to some degree. The question to me with Calhoun is he really explosive enough as an edge rusher? Because he's not a point-of-attack player. So Shilique Calhoun ultimately is going to have to be an edge rusher. Now, that doesn't just mean running around the edge, but he's going to have to beat offensive tackles on the outside. And again, I know you and I see him a little differently. I didn't see enough of that in watching his Michigan State tape to feel really good about that transition to the NFL, but ultimately that's what he would have to be.
Well, one trait you always hear when you talk about edge rushers is heavy hands, the ability to jar offensive linemen on contact. Joey Bosa absolutely does. And one player that I think a lot of people really like his hands, Shak Lawson from Clemson, another guy that kind of wins with power and leverage, not necessarily going to beat you around the corner, but he wins in different ways.
You know, it's funny you mention him, and he's a guy I've struggled with on film. He had a great game against Ronnie Stanley. He beat him a number of times with counter moves to the inside. I watched maybe 6 or 7 games. It was the only game where I really felt Lawson looked like a true edge player. I actually talked to one coach who played against him, and the coach basically told me that he thinks he'd be better as a 3 technique, which I found really interesting because I almost felt the same way watching him, that he'd be better as a 3 technique because I didn't see sort of the explosiveness on the edge. You mentioned the hands, but I didn't see him as an explosive athlete, as an edge pass rusher.
You're talking about bend, use of hands, and those heavy hands. We were talking about pass rushers. That's how you try and project them to the NFL. For Greg Cosell, I'm Fran Duffy. Thanks again for joining us inside the film room on PhiladelphiaEagles.com.